Wow, that was a nice surprise. But welcome everyone. A very warm welcome on a very cold evening, also to people at home. So nice of you that you're watching from the coziness of your own home, or wherever you are, of course. Yes, it's quite wet outside, but we have some heaters. Yeah, I wanted to share with you, but it's already communicated, that indeed 2 days ago I successfully defended my PhD, and it was, I can tell you it was very nerve-wracking, and it was a Zoom session. It was not a procession through the university, it was a Zoom session, but it was festive nevertheless. So today we organized this event for you, Can You Smell Blue?, about synesthesia. And generally synesthesia occurs when one sense is physically triggered, but you perceive something in another or even more other senses. And I'm very curious, which one of you is a synesthete? Are there a lot of synesthetes here today? Hands? One hand? About 5% of the population has some form of synesthesia. Are you willing to share which type you have? Just shout and I'll repeat it or say it at a low voice and I'll repeat it. Colors. Colors and people. Yeah, personality to colors, colors to personalities. That's also a quite common type. The most common type is grapheme, when people see letters in colors. Lots of people only find out they're a synesthete at a really high age because they think everyone perceives the world they do. That everyone sees the A as red, that everyone sees colors when they hear music. That's not the case. Smell synesthesia is really rare. That's why we're talking about that today. And also realize or think about the fact that we live in an increasingly audio-visual society because of COVID. We are Zooming all the time. That means we're only listening, seeing, not smelling, tasting and touching anymore. That's why it's so interesting to explore how can we transmit smell without smells. We will have smells here today. We even sent smell packages to the people at home. By the way, it's a blue moon tonight, as August told me. So can you smell blue? With artists and scientists. So we have Amy Toner, Ibo Bakker, Han van der Vegt, Anton Dorso, Tessa van Leeuwen and Francesca Strik, Lievers. Not all of them are here today, understandably, because of the current conditions. And I'm going to give you an introduction on smell synesthesia in history, because it was once much more common and accepted to be a synesthete, and especially a smell synesthete. You all said, no, I'm not a synesthete, but we all understand that there's some sort of interconnectedness between the senses. Because if I ask you now, which of these shapes is called Kiki and which one is called Booba? Okay, I'll give you 2 seconds. Who says this is Booba? Who says this is Kiki? Everyone, people at home as well, I think. Why? Why is that shape called Kiki? You want to give it a try? Because of the shapes? Angular. So, and which two senses are working together then? Yeah, it's hard to explicitly explain it, but you understand it. A fundamental understanding, yeah? Kiki sounds sharp. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so it's sound and what you see. Seeing and hearing. Or is it also touch? Is sharp touch or sight? Yeah. You know, by looking at a shape, you also know what it feels like. So there is a connectedness in sound and in shape and in, well, between all the senses. There's another very interesting interconnectedness between seeing and touching. Some people are already shivering. Who feels something by looking at this picture of a cup in fur by Merit Oppenheim? Objects. Can I see hands? Who feels something tactile? Almost everyone. But then the next question, where do you feel it? Do you feel it in your hand or on your mouth? Where do you feel it? In your stomach. Yeah, it's just yeah. Your nose. So you feel it, okay. Because you imagine picking it up, putting it against your lips. Yeah. But is it wet fur or dry fur? Yeah, I'm very detailed. That's what I feel. When I see this cup, I imagine filling it with tea, picking it up, putting it against my lips, and then having those wet hairs against my lips. So just by looking at a picture, I imagine things. Imagination is multi-sensory. And the sense of sight can really trigger your sense of touch. But that's not really synesthesia. But you see how the senses are always connected. Now, the chemical senses are rarely discussed when it comes to synesthesia. There is a famous flavor word, synestheto. And for that, if we want to experience a bit what he experiences when people talk to him, you have to put this in your mouth. It's called Bitrex. It's beneath your chair. Paul, the people at home didn't get the Bitrex. No, oh, sorry people. Maybe just get something bitter. Beer. Do you have a beer in your hand? That's perfect. Because we're looking for bitter. Oh, that was very mean. Very mean of me. So if you're ready, we're going to look at how this synesthete James Wannerton reports about his type of synesthesia. Oh, did it wrong. There we go.
Hi, I'm James, and I have a neurological trait called lexical gustatory synesthesia, which essentially means that every word sound I hear comes with an automatic and extra taste and texture perception. It's not just an association either, it's a full-on mouthfeel. There's taste, flavour, texture, volume and temperature all involved. It also produces a range of emotional responses, from the very pleasurable all the way down to absolutely disgusting. My synesthetic taste can't be turned off or indeed turned down. I've experienced these for as long as I can remember, so I'm pretty much used to it all by now. For me, in my synesthesia, there are a number of words that produce a particularly bitter taste in my mouth, but we'll begin with the word bitter. Whenever I hear the word bitter, I immediately experience a strong, sharp flavour and texture. It's very similar to the pith of an orange. That's the white fleshy parts of the orange skin. The synesthetic taste is recognisably bitter, but it's not overpowering, and the texture is fleshy and fibrous, and there's a sprinkling of tiny, sharp orange flavours in there as well. So the overall flavour experience, synesthetic flavour experience of the word bitter is pretty complex for me. Examples of other strong synesthetically bitter words include, for example, the name Philip, the word fit. The London Underground stations at Shoreditch, at Holborn, and most especially at Bond Street are all bitter tasting at various levels of bitterness. The word bitter overall produces a pretty pleasant synesthetic taste experience for me. The only negative being that it tends to linger on as an aftertaste for longer than normal. But I can live with that. Anyway, many thanks, and enjoy this fascinating Odorama event, and above all, stay safe. Long.
No. 3 fingers. No, wait. Yeah, I've got it, yeah. So, flavor synesthesia. By the way, he once told me during a conference, he cannot date a woman with a name that doesn't taste right. Because if he has to think of her, or of her name, or she says her name, or he says her name, and he feels a nausea coming up every time, it's just impossible. So it can also be a handicap. Synesthesia doesn't need to be. But it was very common about a century ago, and that's what I studied with my PhD research. One of the first synesthetic artworks happened here in the Théâtre d'Art in Paris in the 1890s, 1891, by Roinart. And there were sounds. Vowels played an important role. There were colors, colored lights, and there were smells. And all those things needed to coincide. Not just on a subjective level, they actually thought that they could scientifically prove how all the senses could correlate. And this isn't just something of the 19th century. Isaac Newton already had a system in which all the different notes corresponded to a different color. And you can also see how different composers then probably also copied other composers. I want to take a look at Alexander Scriabin, who was also a synesthete probably. That's his color scheme. It's quite different from the others. And he had a conversation once with another Russian composer. I forgot his name. They were listening to a concert, and then at some point Scriabin said, I particularly liked the yellow part in the middle. And then his colleague said, no, to me it was much more golden. Those were very common conversations. Besides musical note to color, there was this scheme that was used during that play in the Théâtre d'Art, and it was by Pièce, and it was called Gamme des odeurs. Every musical note also corresponded to a olfactory note, so to a scent. There was no scheme connecting smells to sounds, but the director just did a puzzle, and he connected what he did know, and then, for example, blue would have to be acacia. So we can smell acacia. For the people at home, that's called farnesol. And just smell if it's blue to you. Farnesol. Don't worry if it doesn't smell blue to you. This was very much a cultural construct. And here you see other examples. A lily did not smell white just because the flower was white. No, a lily smelled green. An iris smelled yellow in spite of its purple color. Violets, also yellowish, and orange blossom, orange, even though it has white flowers. There was another really interesting synesthetic theory by von Hornbostel, Geruchshelligkeit, or smell brightness. And he theorized that every sense could be categorized in dark and light. So for touch, there was smooth and rough, and then smooth would be light and rough would be dark. For temperature, cold would be light and warm would be dark. Pain When it was a stingy pain, it would be light, and a dark pain would be more dull, etc., etc. So darkness and brightness could be used as a categorization for all sensory impulses, even though in itself, of course, it's visual, dark and light. A lot of artists also try to paint smells. You probably all know the example of Kandinsky, who painted music, the music by Schoenberg. By the way, in this era, it was not called synesthesia. The French called it audition colorée, so colored hearing, and the Germans called it Farbhören. And here you see a painting by Kandinsky that's part of the collection of the Stedelijk. That is actually a piece of music at the same time, because it paints movement and rhythm and atmosphere. He did not say a lot about smell, actually only one sentence, because he wrote an entire book about synesthesia, and only one sentence dedicated to smell synesthesia. The expression fragrant colors is pretty common. That's all. But it says a lot, because he takes it for granted. He thinks that all his readers know. Everyone knows that colors are fragrant. Cézanne was also known to paint smells. Actually, he tried to translate, while he was painting a landscape, he tried to translate the sounds of the landscape, the breeze he felt while he was painting, and all the smells of the landscape. But that was not enough for the futurists. That was not extreme enough. The futurists was a group of artists at the beginning of the 20th century in Italy, was led by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. He wrote his first manifesto in 1909. And in that very first manifesto, he already stated something remarkable. The scent alone is enough for us beasts. So he already introduced the role of smell for his movement for the coming 40 years. So it was always treated as a visual art movement, literary art movement. They also engaged the sense of smell. These are some of the things they did. They organized dinner parties all over the world in the 30s, and they were extremely popular. At Mediamatic there are also neo-futurist dinners inspired by these dinners. And it's interesting how many senses they triggered. Taste, thermoception, that's temperature, touch, sight, smell, hearing, and they diffused sense not just with a ventilator or with cardboard sticks, no, with an airplane propeller. That's the way you diffuse smells as a futurist. One of the smells they diffused during those dinners is also in your box, and that is called eau de cologne. I'm very curious if you have any Proustian memories right now. Your grandmother probably wore this. And may I ask you, if you had to choose, is this smell, you have to choose between two colors. Is it red or is it blue? Red. Who says red? Who says blue? Okay, a few. And can you tell me why it's red? Anyone? Why is it red? Because it smells warm. That was the ghost of Marinetti. And the one, someone who smells blue, why is it blue? Anyone? Yeah, it's hard to tell, but we have these very direct associations. To me it smells blue, maybe because the package is also blue. Could be, and to me it smells more fresh, but every smell has warm and fresh qualities to it. Another thing they diffused was a scent that became the symbol of modernity because it smelled of electricity, ozone. You also have some ozone in your package. And they had actual ozonizers and used those to make all the food smell like ozone. So modern. And to me, I included this because to me it's very blue. Light blue. Of course, you can have all kinds of different associations. The futurists wrote many manifestos about smell, in which they also try to define the sense of smell. What is smell? They thought that it was a form and intensity of vibration. So sounds, noises, and smells are nothing but different forms and intensity of vibration. This also meant that they could easily, this is a figure I made, I'm not sure if it makes it much more clear, but because all senses were considered electromagnetic in nature, traveling as a wave through the ether, and then being received by a nerve, the futurists thought that they were much more sensitive than other people, and they could easily, in their heads, in their brains, translate any sensory impulse to another. So it doesn't matter if they saw something, heard something, or read something, they could always translate it to a musical piece, a perfume, etc., etc. So that could lead to these kinds of texts. From the point of view of color, sounds, noises, and smells can be yellow, green, dark blue, light blue, or purple. While the sounds, noises, and smells of animals are yellow and blue, those of a woman are green, blue, and purple. I have no idea why. I tried to find out. I couldn't figure it out. Well, I did find out that red was considered very masculine because it's so active and dynamic. And the woman was seen as something more, something more passive. So green, blue, and purple. This is what a smell would look like when they painted smells. And I want to ask you, which smells sweeter? This one or this one? So who says that this one smells sweeter? Yeah? And who says this one? Most say that one. I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. Every answer is okay, because we all have different reasons for pairing certain visual characteristics to other sensory phenomena. This is the most interesting manifesto ever written on smell synesthesia. 1924, Fedele Azzari. The futurist flora and plastic equivalents of artificial odors. Azzari tried to translate not just smells to something two-dimensional. No, he wanted to translate perfumes into something three-dimensional. These artificial flowers were supposed to not mimic nature, but to transcend nature, to replace nature. It didn't look natural. That was their utopian idea. Everything had to be man-made. So it also had to smell unnatural. And one of the scents that Azzari chose to perfume his plants in a synesthetic way is on one of your blotters, also people at home. It's called Tabac Blonde by Caro. Tabac Blonde as an artificial floral smell. It's nice to watch your expressions. Some are a bit appalled and others enjoy the memory of their grandmother. Who thinks of his or her grandmother? Some people? Yeah, this was so modern in the days that our grandmothers were young. Why? Do you smell the light tobacco note? Tobacco, vanilla. that was very modern because this was the time, the 20s, when women, flapper girls, started to wear trousers and smoke cigarettes for the first time. So this perfume blended in with their exhaled cigarette fumes. And it also contained synthetic notes, so not synesthetic, but synthetic notes, artificial notes. Now we're all very enthusiastic about natural perfumes, but in those days, synthetic, that was the best, that was modern. Tabakblond. And just to demonstrate how the futurists thought about smell synesthesia, they emphasized that it's not about associations. Okay, a rose is red, so when I smell the scent of a rose, I think of red? No. And to demonstrate that, Cangiulo made a little poem called Odori. It's very complicated. Here he says, Rosa è garofano. So, rose is carnation. But a garofano is also a rose plus a violet. And a violet is also a rose and a lily of the valley and vanilla. How does this work? It works because in Italian and also in French, some names of flowers are also the names of colors. So he didn't mean a rose is also a carnation. No, he meant pink is a carnation. A carnation smells pink. And a carnation is also pink plus a violet. And in the end, the conclusion is it's an odor jam with non-related colors. So here you see Coco Chanel, a typical flapper girl. She would wear tabakblond. That would be typical for her. She didn't want to smell like an innocent flower. She wanted to smell like a self-made woman. Oh, that's very sudden. This was my introduction. I want to give the floor to someone who's not here right now, but she's one of the experts when it comes to synesthesia, and that's Tessa van Leeuwen, a cognitive neuroscientist, and she pre-recorded her talk, and she'll let you in on the phenomenon and why it is that smell synesthesia is so rare and rarely researched. Please enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, big thank you to Caro Verbeek and for the organizers at Mediamatic for inviting me to contribute a talk to this evening. It's very nice to be at an event about smell synesthesia because those are not very common. It's not that often researched, so it's really great to be a part of this evening. I would like to talk to you a bit about developmental synesthesia. So the type of synesthesia that has been with people since their childhood, they cannot ever remember it not being there. I will talk about some of the common forms, but mostly about taste and smell synesthesia that are less commonly researched than the more frequently occurring types of synesthesia. And I will talk also about how you can study these types in the brain and what has been found related to that. So to start off, some of the most common forms of synesthesia are grapheme color synesthesias. For instance, for numbers or letters, a color is elicited automatically when people read the letter or see it or hear it. And an example is given here at the bottom. What is also considered a grapheme color synesthesia, or at least color synesthesia, is time unit synesthesia. For instance, for days of the week or months of the year, people can experience a color. Another very common form is sequence space. synesthesia in which people see sequences like days of the week or months of the year or even numbers. They see them in space. So in this case, this person has a type of synesthesia for months, and these months are, these are actually 4 different people with 4 different orientations for the months. But the months are experienced in a circle around somebody's body. So for this person on the top right, for instance, February and March might be in front of them, while October and September are behind them. And this type of synesthesia also plays a role in memory. So when people try to remember an event from the past, they might know that it happened somewhere there, so that it was in the fall, and they know that it wasn't in the spring. So this type of synesthesia is also helpful for memory. And so these are just some examples of very common forms that that may occur in about 4% of the population, which is actually quite a lot of people. So onto the theme of this evening, which is about smell and taste, maybe also a little bit. So I'm going to talk about taste and smell synesthesias in this talk. And one form that might be relatively common is phoneme taste synesthesia. And for those people, there are certain phonemes, certain sounds, like in this case, the P, which occurs in words like parents or deploy. Of course, there are many other words with P. And then they elicit a taste like apple. And there are numerous examples here. You can imagine for this person in hearing words with these sounds in them, these phonemes in them, if that happens continuously, that you get a taste in your mouth, this is actually quite a strong experience. And this is also maybe more intruding in daily life than grapheme color synesthesia might be, because grapheme color synesthesia is something that usually occurs for written letters on the screen or on a piece of paper, so it only occurs when you're reading and not so much when you're in conversation with someone else. So sound taste synesthesia is quite a strong form of synesthesia that may influence people's perception of, how they experience language. Another really nice experience, a really nice form of synesthesia is tone interval taste synesthesia. So this was a rare case studied by Jan Bailey et al. and published in Nature in 2005. This is about a professional musician who experiences specific tastes for tone intervals. So for instance, a minor second interval may elicit a sour taste in her mouth. And being a professional musician, these tastes that she experiences actually help her to identify the tone intervals. And in a really nice experiment, what Bailey et al. Did is they gave this person tastes in her mouth. So they just gave her a little, something on their tongue to taste, while she had to identify tone intervals. So they could give her a taste on the tongue that was actually congruent with the tone interval that she was hearing. But they could also, in this case, for instance, for the minor second interval, they might give her a sour taste on the tongue. But it could also be incongruent. So for the minor second interval here, they would give her a bitter or a salty taste on her tongue. And her task was to identify the tone intervals. And being a professional musician, this should in principle not be a problem. And what they then showed here in this graph is that when the tastes they gave her on the tongue were congruent with the tone interval and congruent with the synesthetic experience that she already had, she actually was faster to identify the tone interval. So here on the y-axis is the reaction time, and this is for synesthete ES when they gave her taste on the tongue. When it matched with the synesthesia that she experienced, she was faster in identifying the tone interval. But when they gave her a taste on the mouth, bitter, for instance, for this minor second interval that elicited normally a sour synesthetic taste, she actually took much longer to identify the tone interval. So this indicates that the taste she got on her mouth interfered with her synesthetic experience and then somehow also slowed down the identification of the tone interval because there was a mismatch that that it caused a delay in her response. If there was a neutral taste on her mouth, she was not faster or slower. So this is the blue part. And also controls did not show any of these effects. And also when they just provided a conceptual taste, so not an actual taste on the mouth, but just telling her which taste it should be. There were also no effect on the reaction times. So this shows that the synesthesia is very strong and is also used in her daily life and cannot be switched off also. So another really nice example of taste and smell synesthesia, so this is also really about smell, is from an artist, SC, and she experiences synesthesia, smells for spoken language, but also for music, for instrumental music and environmental sounds. And in her language, word synesthesia, of course, she also experiences smells and taste for people's names. And so this is all in Dutch. I will translate some of the examples that she gave. I met her at a science and art festival a couple of years ago. And for all the visitors that came through that evening, she provided her synesthetic experience to their name. There are a couple of these experiences you can now try at home or in the public. So for the public, there is the smell of acetone, which she experiences for the names Bart and Bas. And for the people at home, there is the experience here of the perfume Anais Anais, which she experiences for the name Miranda. So you can try that. I'll go back to the previous page a little bit to highlight some examples. Like Amarins, that name tastes like raisins. Feta tastes like peas. There is Cindy, which tastes like chicken soup. So in some cases, the synesthetic smells may also be similar to the words, to the names, in terms of sound or some kind of, semantic congruency, but it can also be completely random. So here we are, for instance, Janica tastes like ointment. There is walnut for Joris, and there's a couple of more words here that also elicit the taste of the smell of Anais Anais, the perfume, Stefan and Yvonne. So here it's also clear that it's the sound of the word doesn't have to be the same in order to elicit the same smell. So it can also be some other association that she had. So this is another example of she experiences this type of smells and tastes, so very different, right? From acetone to perfume all the time when she experiences language or music. So you can imagine that's also a pretty strong type of synesthesia. And we will come back to her later because there was also an experiment where they looked at brain activity for this type of, for her synesthetic experiences. Another example is where taste or smell is not a concurrent induced synesthetic experience, but is actually inducing color synesthesia. So in this case for Sean Day, he's a synesthete, he's also a synesthesia researcher. When he eats something spicy with peppers and he drinks that together with coffee, he sees this green cloud in front of him. So this is an example of where taste and smell induce something new, namely a colored shape. And this, something similar happens for lemon pie. So when he eats lemon pie, he sees this orange and blue flag in front of him. So when we want to study synesthesia and we want to measure something about it, we first have to verify that the synesthetes actually do experience the synesthesia genuinely. And we usually do this by doing some kind of memory task. So for synesthetes, their experiences are very specific. And when you ask them again a couple of years later, even, they might still report the exact same experience. So they're very stable over time. And this is a hallmark characteristics that is usually used when identifying synesthetes. A nice example is here for this number color synesthete. Across a couple of weeks, he will identify exact same color for the same numbers, showing that his experiences are very stable over time. There are also this type of tests you can do online to find out if you are a synesthete. There's also a version in Dutch at a website I built with a colleague a couple of years ago. And it basically looks like this. So for numbers and letters, you can choose a color on the screen. The number or letter will occur 3 times, and a different score is calculated across the 3 color choices. And when you're a synesthete, you will choose a color very consistently. So you will have a very low difference score, indicating your stable synesthetic experiences. When we want to do something like this with smell synesthetes, especially when smell is the synesthetic experience, you can imagine this is a little bit more difficult. So in a study on this artist SC that I just mentioned, so she experienced the synesthetic smells for the names. This was done by giving her a list of 100 words and then asking her to verbalize what kind of taste and smell she experienced for that word. So like we just saw for Bart and Bas, or for similar words, this might be acetone or another verbal description of what she experiences. And what was then done is to repeat this after 9 months. And then the experimenters, in this case, first author is Olympia Colisoli, they scored how similar the verbal descriptions of the synesthetic concurrent experiences were. So some of these descriptions, of course, were highly similar across the two occasions, but there might also be differences because the smell that you experience then first needs to be translated into words and then reported. So it's not like you just directly pick your color that you see in front of you as your synesthetic experience. No, you have a synesthetic experience, and that has to be first translated into words, and then retested again after a couple of months. So you can imagine that there is a less strong correspondence there. So it's hard to test this type of consistency. So here you can see on the y-axis is the percentage of responses that had either an identical or a nearly identical or even an unrelated description across the two test moments for synesthete SC, which is in dark, and the controls who are in a lighter gray color. And you can see here that for the synesthetes, there was a really large percentage of words that actually had the exact same description, which is pretty special after 9 months. And this was also, for her, it was significantly more often identical or nearly identical than for the controls. So that is a way to show that her synesthetic experience are very consistent, but it doesn't reach this 90% score that you would get for color synesthesia, simply because it's just harder to remember how you verbally described your smell experience. So if I want to study synesthesia in the brain, you have to use some kind of method to find out about the brain activity. And one thing I'd like to go in now is to localize where in the brain there are areas that are related to synesthetic experiences. And I have done this for grapheme color synesthesia, and some other researchers have also done this for smell synesthesia. So I want to say some words about that. So for grapheme color synesthesia, it is relatively easy. You show people a letter or number on the screen. You put them in the fMRI scanner here on the right. And you show them, for instance, letters that induce synesthesia, like O or R, and you show them some letters or numbers that do not induce synesthesia. And then you compare the activity in the brain for those two things. And you find out where the active brain regions are. And of course, showing people letters on a screen is relatively easy. In the scanner, they have a screen in front of them, and you can do that. So what I found for this type of synesthesia, so grapheme color synesthesia, is that graphemes that induce synesthesia showed more color activity in the brain than graphemes that did not induce synesthesia. And this is this little red blob here. So it was not a very strong effect, and this was across 20 synesthetes. So you can see that it's relatively subtle. And these big yellow areas at the back of the brain are the actual color areas. So these are involved in color processing, and only a small subset of this brain region is then involved in the synesthetic color. So this is a vertical cut through the back of the brain, and this is a horizontal cut very low in the brain. So the color area is located in the back of your brain. So this is for grapheme color synesthesia, relatively easy to do. And then we go to the smell, taste synesthesia types. This was also, again, this artist SC who took part in this study. And what the experimenters did is contrast. So she read or listened to tasty versus tasteless words. So some word would elicit a strong taste for her, and others did not elicit a taste. And then they compared the brain activity for these two conditions. one thing was that, of course, words, when she listens to them, also activate a language areas, a language network in the brain. So they had to control for that. So in this graph here, you can see a cut, again, vertical through the brain, but at the side. In yellow are all the areas involved in language, so Dutch words versus Chinese characters that she did not understand. And in red are tasty versus tasteless words, so this is the effect of the synesthesia. And you can see that for the most part, these activations are actually overlapping with the language network. So it doesn't seem that the synesthesia induces any specific taste or smell effect in the brain. Or at least not detectable in this setting and in this paradigm for this person. So this is, of course, only one synesthete. There was another study on smell synesthesia by Jason Chan et al. And in 2014. And this was a special case in which this synesthete experienced smell for congruent visual stimuli. So certain pictures, like a picture of a banana, a picture of coffee, or a pizza, would induce a congruent smell for him. So even if it's just a picture. And there were also a lot of pictures of foodstuffs and other things that did not induce a smell. So in the bottom row, you can see things that did not elicit a smell for him. And in the top row, there were things that did elicit a physical smell. And this is, of course, a typical synesthesia in the sense that the smell is always congruent with the picture, because for other smell synesthesias, this hasn't been the case. So many of these associations seem to be completely random. So it was a bit of a question, like, is this genuine synesthesia or not? But these experiences did seem to be very stable over time. And what Jason Chan et al. Did is also to measure this person with the fMRI. So you can show where in the brain regions are active that are related to this type of synesthesia. And they first located the smell area. So they used a localizer, that is called, to localize the smell area in the brain, which is the piriform cortex, very close to your nose, actually. And the way they did it is that this person was lying in the scanner, and they had different smells, odors, that so they would just open a little vial and then have him smell this while he was actually lying in the scanner. So the experimenter was standing next to this person and doing this while this person was in the scanner. So this is also an example that it's a little bit more difficult to do this type of smell research than it is to just show somebody a letter on the screen for the grapheme color synesthesia. So using the smell localizer, they were able to locate the smell area in the brain. And what they then did is they had synesthete and 3 controls perform a task in which there were these pictures that either elicited synesthesia or did not for this person. So these pictures were interleaved, and all he had to do was press a button for certain pictures. And what they then did is they looked in the smell area, like, is there in the smell area more activity for synesthesia inducing pictures than for pictures that do not induce synesthesia for this person. And they found that that was indeed the case. So here for 3 controls participants, this is the amount of activity in the smell area. And for the non-synesthetes, there were not a lot of difference between the 2 types of images. For them, it was all pretty similar. And for the synesthete on the right, you can see that for the synesthesia inducing pictures, there was a lot more activity in the smell area, which is an indication that he genuinely experienced smell for these pictures. Okay, I've come to the end of my talk now. So what I basically showed is some common types of synesthesia that are relatively easy to study, and that smell and taste synesthesias are slightly less common, but still there are quite a few studies already on what is happening for these types of synesthesia in the brain. I'd like to thank you again for your attention, and I'd be happy to hear if there are any questions.
We're live. We're going to call Tessa, so you better have a really good question. Who would like to ask the first question? Maybe also people at home have a question for Tessa. Hi, Tessa. Thanks for being here, live at Mediamatic. We just listened to your amazing talk. May I ask you the first question?
Yes, you can.
What triggered you to study synesthesia? And another quick question, are you a synesthete yourself?
Yes, I'm a synesthete. I'm a grapheme color synesthete. I also have so I've colored letters, colored numbers, and colors days of the week. And for written musical notes, I also experience synesthesia. And finding out I was a synesthete myself, I only found out when I was 20, was actually the trigger to look up some of the literature on this, because I have known that I had this experiences for all my life, but not that it had a name and that it was something you could, investigate. So that really triggered my interest to study this.
Okay, thank you. I had no idea you had so many different types of synesthesia. That's very nice to hear. I'm just looking at the people in the room here. Does anyone have a question? Another question for Tessa? Yeah, over there. Maybe someone with a Freddie Mercury stick can go there for safety reasons, so she can keep a distance. Sorry, Tessa, just another moment.
Okay. You had a question?
Yeah, there was a question over there. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering if you perhaps had done any studies on people with disabilities and coinciding synesthesia?
I couldn't really fully grab the question, but whether there are any people with disabilities who also have synesthesia, or?
Yeah, if you studied a correlation between disabilities or other abilities and synesthesia.
Not quite a correlation necessarily, but yeah, have you done any studies?
Well, I've done some studies on not necessarily disabilities or other problems, but synesthesia is a bit more common among people with autism spectrum conditions. So it's been found that up to 20% of people with autism have a form of synesthesia, which is much higher than in the general population. Synesthesia may also be linked to OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, but this hasn't fully been investigated yet. So it does seem to be related to some other differences in perception and functioning. So that's something definitely that research, I think, is now heading towards, like to find out whether synesthesia is more related to these kind of differences in perceptual abilities.
Thank you. Is there another question in the room? There's another over there.
If someone is colorblind, can they associate with colors, even if they never seen colors?
Tessa, did you hear that? So if someone's colorblind, can they still have some type of color, other modality synesthesia? Can they still?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we were wondering whether colorblindness and synesthesia would somehow be exclusive of each other, but it does seem that you can be colorblind and still have synesthesia, but hasn't been investigated whether people then also experience synesthetic colors that are not, in their normal color repertoire. So it's just not known.
Okay, thank you. There's another question over there, or not? Yeah. Okay.
I'm just curious. I don't know who would answer this one, but you were saying a century ago it was more prominent than it is now. Is it that we just aren't aware of it now, or were there actually a lot more people than that had these qualities?
Tessa, if it's okay with you, it's a question about historical examples of synesthesia. Maybe I can answer it quickly.
Yeah.
So of course, synesthesia is not just physiological, but also a cultural phenomenon. So if there's if there are fertile circumstances, there are more occurrences of synesthesia, and it was very bon ton. It was very popular. You were not considered a real artist if you did not have some type of synesthesia. So people, I wouldn't say faked it, but they really wanted to be a synesthete, and they had different definitions of synesthesia, which is more like the Kiki and Booba example. They call it correspondences. So, of course, a smell can be fresh and a color can be fresh. That's called cross-modality. I don't know if you want to add something, Tessa, about how come, are there more cases of synesthesia in certain countries or eras?
I don't think that's known, actually. I mean, there are definitely more synesthesia studies also in Asia and other countries, so I don't know whether the prevalence really differs, but I think it's difficult to tell. I mean, now I think there's more attention for synesthesia in the media, but like you say, 100 years ago it might have been more popular to be a synesthete, and the definition has also changed, I think, over the course of the years. So now it really should be like an additional experience that other people do not have, so it really excludes things like cross-modal correspondences that everybody experiences to a certain extent. But it is a current discussion whether everybody is a little bit synesthetic, so whether it is actually a continuum in the general population, from having no such experiences at all to being a full-on synesthete with multiple forms. So that discussion will probably take a while to find out whether that's really the case.
Okay, thank you. I see that there are more questions in the room, but I really also want to give the floor, I'm so sorry, to some of the people maybe at home. Are there questions from people at home? No? Okay. Yeah, it's the floor is yours.
Hi, I was wondering, can you learn, are you born with synesthesia or is it learned behavior?
Tessa, I think Anton will also talk a bit about this, but maybe you can also already give away something about genetics and synesthesia?
Yeah, so synesthesia in general is heritable. So when your parents are synesthete, you have about 40% chance of also having a form, and it doesn't have to be the same form that is inherited. So it is the tendency or the talent to become a synesthete that is inherited, and then the environment also determines what types of synesthesia come about. So a study in the United States has also shown that children who played with Fisher-Price sets, alphabet sets with magnet letters that had colors, that they more often had these colors in their synesthetic alphabet. So the environment in which you grow up does determine which kind of associations are created, but still whether or not you are able to develop synesthesia is something that is probably genetically defined, but it's just not clear yet exactly which genes are involved. So you are born with this talent to become a synesthete, and then during your childhood it either emerges or not.
So you might have been a synesthete as a child, yeah, and then it went away. Niklaus, the last question. Did you have a question? Or am I forcing a question on you?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, the Freddie Mercury stick. One last time. Okay, I'll repeat the question, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, it seems like a superpower, and I was just wondering if there's some sort of job profile formed around synesthesia, and is there some future concept?
So Niklaus describes synesthesia as a superpower. It seems like a superpower. So is it imaginable that people want to hire synesthetes because of their qualities? Is it imaginable? Do they have certain professions?
That's a great question, because I gave a talk once at a food company. So it was about they have these tasting panels because they develop new desserts and stuff, and they want to know whether it tastes good and whether it tastes the same every time, even if they change some ingredients or they change some. So they were interested maybe in smell color synesthetes or smell vision synesthetes and taste vision synesthetes, because they needed to make sure that every time they changed something about the ingredients, that the product would still, taste the same. And maybe synesthetes have an extra sense for that because they also express the taste in a different domain, like vision or something else. So their perception of the taste would be more accurate and stronger. And it's actually shown that synesthetes are, like for instance, color synesthetes who have color as congruent experience. They are more sensitive to subtle differences in color. So there's something to say for the fact that synesthetes might have special expertise when it comes to their synesthesia.
Wow, that's very promising. I want to thank you again. Maybe you can give her another applause, one that she also can hear. Tessa, thank you very much, and I hope you have a.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. And
you're welcome. Oh, we'll call her back. Sorry, another time. Yeah. So, our next participant is an artist, and she pre-recorded a performance. And I just wanted to say a few things ahead. This is what she took as a source of inspiration. Valentine de Saint-Point, a dancer, choreographer, in 1913, she performed the very first futurist aromatic artwork, a dance, a performance. And she walked on stage. You couldn't see her, you could only smell her. She was covered in clouds of fragrant smoke. And then as the smoke went away and the smells also became more dull, only then you would see her. So there was this incredibly exciting, it was very playful between seeing and smelling. And there's actually also a smell that's being handed out. This is what this performance might have smelled like: patchouli, sandalwood, and myrrh. And I sent this smell to Amy, and Amy then composed her dance. So please enjoy Amy's performance. Are you as impressed as I am? Yeah, I'm very moved by this dance. Did it give you any fragrant impressions? Just by looking at it, did it evoke any memories of smell or ideas about smell in your mind?
I was smelling the fragrance.
You were also smelling the fragrance, yeah. Only 1 out of 3 people can actually imagine smells. So most people here cannot. I believe we can also call Amy, right? Do you have a question for Amy? Anyone at home? You're just all struck.
Nummer dat u gebeld heeft, niet in gebruik.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, we can try it again, or we can take a break now. Yeah, and her art did all the talking, perhaps. We're on for a little break. We, of course, because of the measurements, there's no restaurant, nowhere we can have a drink. Are we live? Yeah. Our second part of this event on synesthesia. Our next speaker is Francesca Strik Lievers, a linguist from Italy, and she researches the relation between multisensory words to describe smells. See for yourself.
My name is Francesca Strik Lievers, and I'm a linguist working at the University of Genoa in Italy. Like the other presenters, I will also talk about synesthesia. However, I will not talk about synesthesia as a neurological or neuropsychological condition, but about synesthesia in language. As a matter of fact, although the term synesthesia was first used in its modern sense in the fields of medicine and psychology, it was soon adopted also in studies of literature. And here, the term synesthesia refers to a specific figure of speech that was extremely popular between the 19th and early 20th century. If you think of a work by Romantic poets, by French symbolists, or later by Italian futurists, they were full of sensory images in general, and more specifically of cross-sensory images, that is, images that mix the senses. Here you can see as an example a few lines by Arthur Symons, in which not only many different senses are evoked individually, but they are also mixed together. So music is described through a tactile adjective, soft, and then it is compared to a perfume. Light is sweet, odors are audible, and so on. This is just one example, and quite an extreme one as well, but of course many others can be found. So the term synesthesia was adopted by literature scholars to label precisely this figure of speech in which different senses are mixed up in language. We can define literary and more generally linguistic synesthesia as a type of metaphor that combines linguistic expressions that refer to different senses. And linguistic synesthesia is not only found in poetry, but also in our everyday language. For example, when we say that a voice is bright, or when we say that some colors are warm. And often when we are asked to describe a smell, we describe it using words that are more commonly associated to other senses. And this is because we don't have olfactory words that are specifically dedicated to that specific smell. If you take your sample kit, you should have cinnamon and galbanum in it. You can now try smelling cinnamon and think of how you would describe it in words. As Caro Verbeek pointed out to me, the scent of cinnamon is often described as being hot. And hot is a word that is most typically associated with temperature. I don't know if this is the first word that came into your mind while smelling cinnamon, but apparently many people describe cinnamon as a hot scent. Something similar also happens with galbanum, that you can now try smelling. As many of you probably know better than I do, professional perfumers have developed classification systems that help them to describe fragrances. And within such classification systems, galbanum is usually described as being a fresh fragrance, that is again with a temperature word, and more specifically as a green fragrance, so using in this case a color term, that is a visual word. Now, what has attracted the attention of many scholars, including myself, is that synesthetic metaphors tend to associate the senses in a way that seems to be not completely random. For example, across many languages, taste adjectives are often used to describe hearing nouns, as in sweet melody that you can see here. But the reverse is much less likely. This means that it rarely happens that a hearing adjective is used to describe a taste noun, so something like a melodious taste is not commonly found. In studies of metaphor, the conceptual domain we are talking about is often called the target of the metaphor. In sweet melody, the target is the domain of hearing, because we are talking about something that we hear. The conceptual domain from which we draw to qualify this auditory perception is here the domain of taste, because sweet is most typically used for taste experiences. So we will say that taste is the source domain of this metaphor. So we can describe sweet melody as a linguistic synesthesia in which we have a metaphoric transfer going from taste, that is the source, towards hearing, that is the target. Now, the precise relationship between the individual senses may slightly vary across the studies and across the many languages that have been investigated, but there is one strong tendency that seems to hold. That is, in the vast majority of synesthetic metaphors, the source is one of the so-called lower senses, touch, taste and smell, and the target is one of the so-called higher senses, that is, hearing and sight. This is why researchers often talk about a directionality of synesthetic transfers, because transfers tend to go from the lower senses towards the higher senses. And the instances of synesthesia that we use more commonly in our everyday language tend to also follow this directionality. So we not only have sweet melody that, as we said, goes from taste to hearing, but we also have, for example, warm colors from touch or temperature to sight, soft voice from touch to hearing, and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, of course, why? Why is there such a clear preference in the way the senses are associated in linguistic synesthesia, and not only in English, but in many, many languages? My answer to this question is that there is no single explanation. That is, I think that directionality is the effect of the combination of several and often interconnected factors. These factors have to do with the way our perception works. so with the way our senses are connected in our actual multisensory perception, but also with the composition of a sensory lexicon. So, for example, how many words we have for each sense, the part of speech sensory words belong to, the frequency of usage of these words, and so on. Here I want to focus on just one of these factors that has to do with the way we perceive the world, and more precisely, with the uneven weight that individual senses have in our perception, cognition, and culture. It is well known that sight, and secondarily hearing, play a major role in our perception of external world and as sources of knowledge. This explains why we tend to talk more about these senses, and in particular about our visual experience, compared to how much we talk about the other senses. And this is something that has been recently shown in a study on the use of perception verbs in a large sample of languages. As concerns linguistic synesthesia, this may explain why sight, and secondarily hearing, is the frequent target of synesthetic metaphor, a more frequent target than the other senses, and why it is more frequently a target than a source of synesthetic transfers. Remember that in synesthetic metaphors, the target is what we are talking about, and since we tend to talk about our visual and auditory experiences much more than about our olfactory, tactile, or gustatory experiences, it is unsurprising that the majority of synesthetic metaphors have vision or hearing as their target. But now, how can we prove that this hypothesis makes sense? And here is where smell comes into play. You probably know the novel Perfume by Patrick Suskind, and there is also a movie based on this novel. Very briefly, the main character, who is called Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, is born with an exceptionally strong sense of smell, and this allows him to perceive the world almost exclusively through olfaction. The novel then follows Grenouille in his quest for the perfect scent, and describes the way he perceives the world and acquires knowledge, that is, through his sense of smell. Why is this novel so interesting for us? Because basically it creates a fictional world in which perception functions in a different way. So a world where the main sense is olfaction. So what about the instances of synesthesia that are found in this book? Quite unsurprisingly, smell is by far the most frequent target of synesthetic metaphors. It is the target in more than 80% of the cases. This means that there are many instances of transfers that do not obey the common directionality. Here I read just one example from the English translation of the novel. His scent would gleam. This is a transfer from sight back to smell, because scent is described as gleaming, that is, as being bright, as reflecting light. So this is a clearly counter-directional example. So to sum up and conclude, we have seen that when the senses are associated in language through synesthetic metaphors, they tend to be associated in a very specific way. We basically use touch, smell, and taste word to talk about what we see and hear much more frequently than the reverse. And we have also seen that one of the reasons why it is so is the major role of vision and then hearing in our perception and cognition. So in a perceptual world dominated, for example, by smell, things would probably work in a quite different way. I thank you all for your attention, and here you find my email address if any of you wishes to contact me about synesthesia-related issues.
That was very enlightening. So we don't talk about loud tastes, but we do talk about sweet sounds. And we can even call her. Let's hope it works. Did you think of a good question? Anyone? No question? Think hard.
Hello?
Ciao, Francesca.
Ciao, Caro.
It's Caro from Mediamatic, Odorama, live. We just watched your very incredible, lively and clear talk about synesthetic language. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks to you for the invitation.
And the audience is very shy, but I do have a few questions. I was just wondering, is synesthetic language more prevalent in certain languages than in other languages?
Can you repeat, please?
Yes, sure. In different languages, are there more cases of synesthetic word combinations, like in Italian or in German? Does it happen more often?
Actually, yeah. So it's actually difficult to quantify, really, because synesthesia in language is actually quite rare, meaning that there are some synesthetic expressions like warm colors, for example, that are in our common language, but there is not much variety. There is much variety in poetry, in literature, but not in common languages. So warm colors is used often, but they are not so frequent, let's say. So what would be needed in order to really quantify and say how often synesthetic metaphors are used in Italian, how often they're used in German, and so on, we would need many data, and probably also automatic way to find these instances of synesthetic metaphors. And we are not there yet, so we don't really have the data. So it's something we cannot really answer at the moment. But it would be, of course, interesting to see if there are differences, of course.
Okay, I see. Thank you. And just another thing I'm very curious about. I know you also studied Old Italian and Latin. Did any synesthetic word combinations already occur in Latin? Did they speak of warm colors in ancient and in antiquity?
Okay, I didn't actually study synesthetic metaphors in Latin and Old Italian. What I studied in this diachronic approach from Latin to Italian was the smell lexicon, precisely. So just words for smell. And what is interesting is that it seems that the number of words for smell is similar in Latin and in contemporary Italian. What changes is that the olfactory lexicon seems to become more negative over time. So there are more words for negative smell, for stench, and so on. And there are some words that had a positive meaning in Latin, and their derivatives in Italian have a slightly more negative meaning. So this is an interesting trend, and one may, of course, wonder why, and maybe also find some explanation, although it's not easy, just hypothesis, of course.
Francesca, may I thank you very much for answering these questions and for recording this amazing talk.
Thanks to you.
And please listen to this sweet applause.
Thank you, Caro, and thank you, everyone.
Have a nice evening. Oh, we have some questions. Oh, Francesca, are you still there?
Yes.
Oh, we have some questions from the people at home, and suddenly also in the room. They're getting warmed up. Okay. Question over there.
This might not be relevant to your field of study as a linguist. I was wondering in terms of literary theory, if perhaps the Romantics and the Modernists sort of were that heyday and the Futurists of synesthesia. Do you have any opinion on why, at least it's sort of poo-pooed a bit like in postmodernist poetry nowadays? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't hear much.
Yeah, maybe I can repeat it, but I didn't really get the question.
In terms of the development from Romanticism to modernism, and then sort of nowadays, sort of especially poetic output, so more literary theory than perhaps linguistics. So maybe not your field of study, but why it has been noted that synesthesia is sort of not popular in more current poetry. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So the hypothesis is that synesthesia is not as popular as it used to be in current literary practices and poetry. Why would that be? I'm not sure if it's true, but do you have any thoughts on that, Francesca?
I don't have actually an hypothesis. I think it's becoming more popular again. This is my feeling. I'm not a literature scholar, so just a feeling, but I don't know, so I'm not a literary scholar. But I think it's becoming more popular, and these are sessions that come and go, I think. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for this, because I really don't know about that. Maybe, Caro, you have a more clear idea on this, better answer to this question.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how popular synesthesia was around the fin de siècle in poetry. So the symbolists, Baudelaire, the Maupassant, and then the Futurists. I think the Futurists really took a close look at what happened in France. And it also has to do with scientific discoveries often. So the Futurists and the Symbolists followed scientific insights. They followed what Charles Henry theorized about how the senses correlated. So I showed you that slide of the vibrational paradigm when the senses were still thought to be vibrational phenomena. The futurists really followed everything that happened in science. That was considered science. So I think often art and science and other developments in society coincide. And it comes and goes, like you said, Francesca. Very good question. Does anyone else have a question? Was anyone at home? No. Okay, I think this was really it. So another salty applause, and then we will let you go.
Thank you again.
Ciao, have a nice evening.
Bye.
We're ready to go. So our next speaker is actually also the partner of my supervisor of my PhD, but he's mainly, most of all, he is himself, Han van der Vegt, a poet and translator, and inspired by the very synesthetic language of the futurists, he created a poem, also a translation of smells, because I sent him some futurist smells and then he created that poem. I will clean the microphone for you. And then in the meantime, please give him a warm, salty, green applause.
Thank you so much. I didn't select this smell for you to as a sample, because the main smell in the poem is too aggressive for that. There's the chair. Cervello profumo. For the duration of the procedure, the chair should secure both head and shoulders to its support. Only then can the perfume via valves in the walls be introduced into the hermetic room. The first minutes are dominated by the pain of the contraction with which the nasal membrane reacts to the contact with the aromatics. It rips to relieve the tension, tearing in the underlying cribriform plate rifts along the roof of the nasal cavities on either side. A discharge of cerebral fluid pours itself out in the throat. The brain is left naked, exposed, quivering in its bed. That descent can, without the arbitration of the olfactory nerves, penetrate the lobes. A shudder pervades the brain. They unfurl their sinuous veins and unfold their true essence within the cranium. And with that, they have also become receptive to the revelation of other essences. The caramelized ecstasy of bitumen, the luxury of horse manure, of jasmine, the rage, and of kerosene, the unquenchable ardor. Each smell, in turn, is released into the room and is suctioned off again, until the brain coils back upon itself. The nasal membrane relaxes to cover the rifts. The replenished fluids ease the pain of perception in their silken swells, and you can safely open your eyes. You notice that the exit is unlocked. You rise, unsteady on your feet. Precarious steps take you through the door, where you can once more breathe the familiar air that to you will never smell like it did before. Thank you.
Does anyone have some questions for Han? I'm curious, and I invited you a couple of times. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, of course, I know your work a bit, and you've translated smells into poetry on numerous occasions already. How does that work? How do you start? How do you translate a scent to a poem?
It's associative. So you take the smell and you it summons images. So and it's not directly that an image jumps up, but there are some images that you can associate better with the smell than others, and these should come together, and once they gel and they form a distinct image, then you can make a poem. So you could also, I think, do it from just the sounds, and take the sounds that are suggested by the smell and have a poem revolve about those. Those are, yeah.
This image, I asked Han a very odd question. A couple of days ago, I emailed him and asked him, okay, what would you like to go along with your poem? a photo of some horse dung or a picture of you? And then you said, no, this is more suitable. Yeah, you don't get that question every day. But can you tell us how this picture correlates to your poem?
Well, I went looking for images, and I thought I would depart from a chair, but I needed the chair to be not exactly comfortable, but you can recline in it, and it keeps you secure. So that's from the basic context. And then it should be in a room where it actually shouldn't be. The room and the chair should not fit. And I was planning on taking a chair and then projecting it onto another background. Until I met this image, and I thought, there were actually several images of this chair in this ruin, and this was the best because the chair is more frontal. Yeah.
Sorry for the synesthetic, very bitter sound. Yeah, I think it's very evocative of what the futurists said about smell, and the impressions they describe were always very violent and very loud and very direct and very physical. So to me it was very futurist. Thanks again, Han, for your beautiful poem. Please give him another applause.
Thank you.
So I asked Ibo, as a third artist, I asked him to also respond to futurist synesthesia, futurist poetry. And this is such a fantastic poem. Ritratto olfattivo di una donna. Olfactory portrait of a woman. So the smell portrait of a woman, 1932. And in this, Marinetti describes how he leaves the city. He leaves the smells of the city behind, and then suddenly he catches a trail of cigarette smoke, and he knows it's coming from a woman, and he finds her very desirable, so he starts following the scent trail without seeing her. And the smells she leaves behind are all kinds of shapes and movements and colors. So there are red, egg-shaped smells, there are moving arches of smells, there are spirals of smells. So it's very synesthetic, unique in literature about smell synesthesia, because it's so focused on movement and shape. And I talked to Ibo about this poem, and he felt very inspired also by Marinetti's voice when he recites this poem. The sound of the voice of Marinetti evoked in Ibo certain sounds, and he made a sound piece that also had to be smelly, a smelly sound piece. Sillage des rumeurs. A sillage is a scent trail left behind by a person or an animal or a thing. Applause.
Di ferro, elettricità, carbone, uomo, velocità, con una bocca vedi l'infinito verde della primavera. Sul rincone della città, in cerca di fresco, errando nella varia dolce. Occhi chiusi, navi aperta, di banane col corpo marciante, la grande matassa elasticissima, vibrantissima dei profumi odori. Ed è questo soave agissimo lontano, di freschi rossi, con sopra tre sei, amore spirale di l'olivetta ed è vederla aiutare. A sinistra rose, eccetera. sulla testa, con le mani liquide, granulata di mobili odore latte, freschissime, di acacia, mare, infanzia. Ricominciare. Freschi.
Wow, thank you. Maybe someone has a question for Ibo. What did you have for dinner? Maybe I can. Oh no. Can I ask you something about the process? How did you go about? First, I brought him some smells and some horse dung, and he threw it away. And then we got to talk about this poem. Why were you inspired by this poem?
The voice of this poem and the way he's performing this. It's from which date? Which year?
1932.
Yes. I also like the sound of this year. I don't know why. It's a good. It's a. I don't know, the tone of the voice and the language, and then I just try to mingle some instruments, like Comanche. Someone know what a Comanche is? It's like an Iran, like a violin. You play it like this on your knee. So I have a hole in my other trousers, but not this one. But and a violin and a guitar and a piano and everything. So I just play with it and with the voice and with the dynamics of the voice and things like this.
And you also wanted to make it smelly. How did you do that?
Like this sounds very etherical, like this flageolets. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Here we go.
Good evening, guests and participants of Odorama 42. I feel very privileged to be invited to talk to you today. Over the past 10 years, I participated in and initiated several international projects on synesthesia. It made me aware that synesthesia is a unique phenomenon, not only across individuals, but also across cultures and types. It inspired me on several lines of research into rare types of synesthesia, such as olfactory synesthesia, and the way they are socially integrated and personally understood, which I'll tell you a little bit about today. The statement Initially, this statement struck me as a provocative teaser to do good research. And in the end, it turned out to be as controversial as it is insightful. Indeed, why so many people tend to put so much effort into imitating a disabling disorder? And again, how come that so many synesthete perfumers, as I have found out, get successfully to the top of the perfume industry despite having so poor navigating skills? To put it differently, why and how congenital synesthesia gets integrated in cultural practices? And why and how olfactory types in particular get integrated so paradoxically different from other types of the phenomenon? If you smell my scents in the scent kit, well, actually you can smell any scent in the kit all the way back to the beginning of the event, Those scents that are old and familiar will easily bring back corresponding memories, but the new ones will be persistently forcing your mind to dig out some references to foods or substances that you can identify them with and safely rely on. As you may have already discovered, for those people who have olfactory synesthesia, the story will be a bit different. Even those scents that are new and unfamiliar to them, unique or artificial, will produce a certain subjective reaction in them that they can rely on and use for further referencing. We know that synesthesia is involuntary and additional, mostly unmotivated but category-based. It is consistent over lifetime. For a better understanding of its relation to culture and olfaction, my definition of olfactory synesthesia includes a scope of cases on both sides of the stimulus-reaction event. Recent data shows that color smelling, or synesthesia with smells as triggers, make up 7% of all cases. It is only 2% that are represented by synesthesia with smells as additional reactions. Overall, only one synesthete out of 10 has a smell-based type. Statistically, synesthetes have stronger and more eidetic memory. Their sensory mechanisms are more responsive, and they tend to choose creative careers. What's more important, even if a person with synesthesia does not have a smell-related type, their sensory sensitivity means that at some point they can have olfactory synesthetic experience of what we can call spontaneous synesthesia. For example, a multiple synesthete perfumer, Dawn Goldworm, told me that she developed a long-standing olfactory synesthesia later in her career. Color smelling is a type of synesthesia when smelling elicits color-like reactions. As with other types of synesthesia, these additional reactions are not explained by associations based on synesthete's life history. The quality of these synesthetic experiences are mostly random and unmotivated. For example, a subject of my research describes the scent of pineapple as yellow and sweet sour as usual, while synesthetically it is light blue and prickly. In color smelling, these additional reactions, we call them concurrents, can include not only colors, but also other sensory qualities such as texture, temperature, taste, or shape. In some cases, they can include more complex cognitive properties. These qualities can be changed and manipulated in mind to somehow redesign the properties of a fragrance. For example, as the nose at Coty, Dawn Goldworm worked with another synesthete, Lady Gaga, on her perfume Fame, inspired by Lady Gaga's music. Now, an owner of her own company, Dawn shares how she uses her newly developed olfactory synesthesia by asking her clients what color, shape, and mood they see dominating in their brand. She sees all the ingredients in the fragrance as different colors, and she tweaks the colors within a structure to change the design for different audiences. A multiple olfactory synesthete who I study very accurately remembers the smells of snow in different weather, the smells of some of her close people at different ages, and she can recognize some diseases and relatives by their smells. Pleasant smells, she says, are usually pleasant to the touch, glossy and smooth, or warm and rough, but always firm and clean. She is also able to combine aromas by their shapes, colors, density, location, to represent their complementarity. What determines these additional synesthetic properties? It is not yet possible to give an exhaustive answer, as research shows recognition and hedonistic assessment can be important, as well as its chemical composition and quite likely organoleptic properties in the nasal and throat field. It seems that color smelling hijacks the mechanisms of intuitive judgment, selective sensitivity, and pre-conscious categorization of sense. Those who have this type of synesthesia possess finest memories for smells, the smells of snow in different periods of winter, the smell of July shadow, smell of my granddad's chess. And by having extraordinary properties attached to otherwise ordinary olfactory experience, these synesthetes show exceptional olfactory ingenuity and insight. Here come on stage our favorite Uba and Kiki guys. If I ask you to smell my sample scents one by one and associate them with either of these shapes, one scent will be a surefire answer, but you'll be less certain about the other. And your association for anise can depend on which scent you smelled first. When ordinary people are asked to classify 12 basic, very familiar smells into bubas and kikis, only 2 smells will easily know who they are. Such tests might prove that olfactory symbolism, for some reason, is too subjective, blurry, and unsubstantiated. The human nose can distinguish 1 trillion smells. But the fact is that today's world of smells has become materially liberated, artificially recomposed, mostly objectless, surgically disinfected, and therefore devoid of immediate meaning. It may be very confusing for many, but not for olfactory synesthetes. Unlike many of us, if presented with new or artificial smells, they already have something to rely upon. And for all these trillions of possible scents, they immediately know their place in a system, their hedonic value, and potential symbolism. This is why the language of synesthesia is so convenient for perfumery. And this is why there are so many true synesthetes or wannabes among the top noses. On the other hand, as if in contrast to color smelling, there are varieties of synesthesia when smells are additional reactions. These reactions are olfactory impressions from seeing color, or hearing music, or feeling your own physical state. The essential qualities of such smells seem to be intrinsically ingrained in those mechanisms that enable us to perceive images, understand situations, or experience emotions. These additional olfactory qualities have no references in the physical world, and therefore, by analogy, they can be called Martian smells.
I stop sniffing only after I realize that the smells that I feel often do not have a real source.
This is how these Martian smells are described by one of my research subjects.
That this is some kind of a gameplay of my unconscious,
she says. The phenomenon of Martian smells proves that olfactory images are possible as independent mental olfactory representations, free from physical stimuli. Moreover, all these variable properties of Martian smells, very much like Martian colors, seem to function as the primary manifestation of reason and judgment, and they can be contemplated, enjoyed, and changed. In fact, they seem to represent a direct form of olfactory consciousness about the situation stimulus. If we compare color smelling and Martian smells, they reveal something intriguing. Smells as a stimulus and smells as a reaction in synesthesia have different opportunities for cognitive processes, such as imagination, judgment, composing, and metaphor. Color smelling treats individual smells in a more analytical way and is more characteristic to a perfume critic, while Martian smells provide a different perspective with olfactory impression as its major goal. Martian smellers are more like artists who look for inspiration in the outside world, and through establishing unique correspondences, they design a fragrance unfathomable to others. In 1965, Flux artist Takaka Saito came up with the idea of smell-based chess. There are 12 scents on the board. Each piece on both sides can be identified only through its unique scent. Saito herself is not a synesthete, but her scent chess successfully materializes the way olfactory synesthesia works. When you think of this position on the board, you can recognize who's winning, black or white, through smell and smell alone. Scent here is not a mediating symbol of winning. It is the immediate way of olfactory synesthetic thinking. So, why are there so many synesthetes in the world of perfumery? Because so many of them are actually not. Congenital synesthesia can drastically affect the olfactory system, but even more so because culture-driven perfumery enviously and sneakingly borrows so much from synesthesia. But still, there are many other perfumers who are true synesthetes. There are multiple examples that synesthesia gets integrated through perfumery practices as creations by true synesthetes or as the basis for olfactory language and imagery. Oxford psychologist Charles Spence studied synesthesia in the realm of high cuisine and concluded that very few synesthetes can become Michelin-accoladed chefs and restaurateurs. Using congenital synesthesia in high cuisine may be a dangerous recipe. The human olfactory world, however, lies ahead almost barren, and therefore much more open to experiment and creation. Olfactory synesthetes have already something to explore, create, and mass-produce their olfactory visions as fragrances. So, if you ask a synesthete, can you smell blue? You're bound to get an answer in response. Which blue exactly? The paradox of synesthesia gets solved if you tackle it from a threefold perspective at once. For some people, it is a challenging abundance, and it might seem to be a disabling disorder. However, synesthesia as a phenomenon of generative experience expands our horizons in perfumery, olfactory art, and science. If understood through the lens of personal meaning, practical applicability, and cultural integration, synesthesia turns into a treasure box. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Some technical hiccups, but we finally were able to hear the entire lecture. And Anton is even ready now in Moscow. We can call him and we can ask him a question. Yeah, think, Ibo. Think harder. Only a few more seconds. Anton?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Anton. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk about synesthesia in perfumers. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. I was just wondering, we had some talks before, so I know a bit about you, but could you perhaps, could I ask you about your own synesthesia?
I'm not a synesthete.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I remembered you were a synesthete. May I then ask you, why did you decide to study synesthesia, and why smell synesthesia?
I decided to take up synesthesia as an object of research because it poses a real scientific puzzle, a real scientific challenge. And not only to synesthetes, but to the human race in general, because synesthesia seems to be like a skeleton of human consciousness, because it's based on some systems, and the systems seem to represent subconscious structure. We don't know what the structure is about, but actually it's systematic, and we don't know why. So I decided that it would be a good golden key to the human mind.
And do you think we can learn, there's a question here, can we learn to be synesthete? You said it can occur later in life. Is it something we could all learn?
That's a question that has been haunting our human race for more than 2 centuries. When we define synesthesia, I mean culture-based synesthesia, or reactions based on our experience, in congenital synesthesia. Regarding the congenital types, we cannot learn anything. We should be born with this. As for correspondences that you've been talking about from the perspective of culture and history and art, yeah, we can definitely reinforce some system in our senses, our associations, and so on and so on.
Okay, thank you. I believe there's also a question in the room.
I don't know if I remember it all. What I wanted to ask is, you posed that there was a lot of research that you're going into, and this structure underlying on life. What is your own theory on that? What are you trying to get? What are you trying to find? What are your own hypotheses?
Anton,
we're trying to. Yes. I've heard the question.
Okay.
It's a bit lagging.
Oh, you did not hear the question?
I do have, because it's lagging, so I'm answering or not. Well, regarding the major question that we usually ask when we study synesthesia is how genetics influence the structure of human mind and the functioning of human mind, as well as how it influences perception and its mechanisms. And another big one is how it influences human creativity, and whether this more integrated sensory systems really produces something more creative or just something more vulnerable and systematized. And it's only the personality who possess the systematized vulnerabilities that he or she should use it for creative purposes. That's another question.
Clear? Yeah, thank you. I think that was the last question, unless there's someone at home watching from the live stream. No. Anton, may I again thank you very much. Here's a very fragrant applause for you, all the way to Moscow.
Thank you for coming.
And have a nice, I don't know, what time is it now in Moscow?
Well, it's 1 hour at night.
Okay, yeah, so quite late. I hope to talk to you soon.
Yes.
Thanks again. Ciao, Anton.
Thank you too. Thank you. See you.
See you. Okay, that was our night about synesthesia. Can you smell blue? So I think we should remember to dance to smells. If you can't describe a smell, just think of colors and shapes and movements. And if you want to do, we don't have an image. If you want to do a synesthesia workshop, that's also possible in November. You can learn how to translate a smell into something tactile or into something visual here at Mediamatic. Thanks for being here. I know it was cold, but it was very cozy, so that made it more warm. And hope to see you soon again. Ciao.